Guys, so in this video we are going to cover epithelium histology, which is part of the different tissue types that we're going to cover in all of histology for labs. So the first one is going to be epi, that's our first group of tissues, but we can see here all the different types of tissues. Today's topic, this video, is epithelial tissues, but there's also nervous and muscle and connective tissue. But first up is epithelium. These guys are going to be the lining, the layer tissue. These are going to be the things that are exposed, whether they are literally exposed on the outside of your body, like your skin is, or the inside of your body, any of those surfaces that may be exposed, like inside of your mouth, the lining of your blood vessels, the lining of your GI tract, all that stuff is going to be lined with epithelial type of tissue. So these are going to be linings. It's also the skin surface, and we're going to talk about all the different types of epi in this video, and then go over the slides that we have in our lab. So we have different types of epi, and how you label them, name them, are going to be based on their shape. That's the big takeaway from epithelium. You need to know what they are shaped like and how are they layered up. So on shape, there are three shapes. There are squamous. Squamous are like pancakes. They're really thin and flat. They are excellent for diffusion, filtering things through. Are squamous type of cells. Again, really thin, pancake shaped little guys right here are squamous. Another type of shape is cuboidal. They are about as wide as they are tall, so relatively cube shaped, about as wide as they are tall. And the columnars are wide, but they are much taller than they are wide, so they are column shaped. Makes sense, right? Squamous, pancakes. Cuboidal, cube shaped. And columnars are going to be column shaped, very tall. So that's one part down on the epi. What is its shape? And then how is it layered? How is it layered? Is it just one layer thick? If it's just one layer thick, it's going to be called simple. And those would be your two terms. You would have simple squamous, like we have here, one layer thick of squamous cells. But you can also have multiple layers stacked on top of each other. When the multiple layers are stacked on top of each other, like this guy, where we have multiple cells all on top of each other, that's called stratified. Stratified. Lots of cells all on top of each other. So there's two words that will go along with all of your epi. In this group, these are our pancake shaped ones. They are the squamous, and they are stacked all on top of each other. So they are called stratified. So this is stratified squamous epithelium. Over here, we have some cells that are about as wide as they are tall. So these are cuboidal, but they are stacked on top of each other. So they are stratified cuboidal. Over here, this one, again, really tall versus its width. So these are column shaped, and there's only one layer of these. So these are simple columnars, versus over here, where they are still column shaped, but stacked on top of each other. This is stratified columnar. And then we will have this group of tissue that looks like it's stratified. Like, look at these guys. They look like they're kind of layered on top of each other, but they're not. They are fakers, they are posers, and that's why they have the name pseudo-stratified, because pseudos are fakers. They look like they're stratified, but they're not. In actuality, they're only one layer thick. So pseudo-stratified, and we'll have pictures of all of these, well, most of these, in a little bit. So that's our first takeaway. Again, epithelium are tissues that are going to line either, the outside surfaces of your skin, or they're going to line inside exposed surfaces of lumens of all sorts of things, are your epithelial. And on your epi, they are named based on their shape. Are they squamous, cuboidal, or columnar? And then are they layered together, one layer thick, or are there multiple layers stacked on top of each other? So simple or squamous. Simple or squamous are their layers. Our first stop is going to be our simple squamous. And for this, we are going to want on our epi for us at Georgia Highlands, we need to be able to recognize that this is simple squamous. So these are going to be real thin. Look how thin these guys are, real thin, little guys, kind of pancaked together. There's one right there for these cells. So very, very thin, pancake shaped. So we know if it's thin, it's a simple type of layer. And if it is pancake shaped, it's squamous. So this is simple squamous. And we need to know where would we find this type of tissue? So what's this location? This particular slide is from the lungs. So if you zoom in on the lungs and you zoom in particularly on the alveolar sacs of the lungs, that's where you're going to see it. But other locations include the kidneys and the glomerulus of the kidney specifically because it's going to be in charge of filtration. We'll also find simple squamous on capillaries and lining of the heart, as well as your lymphatic system. All of those guys are going to have simple squamous, but this is an example particularly of the lungs for these pancake-shaped guys that are very thin, one layer thick, simple squamous. Another thing that we need you to know is what are they doing in this location? What is their job? So in the case of simple squamous, one of their great jobs is because they're so thin, they are excellent at diffusion and filtration of materials. In this case, we're in the lungs. So we are going to have air, all of the oxygen is going to come in the lungs, go through these little pancake-shaped cells, and that's going to diffuse through and go into the capillary beds that surround these tissues. And we'll bring the oxygen in, and CO2 will be coming out into this space. So diffusion, filtration are going to be important functions of simple squamous tissues. They are located in multiple spots: the air sacs of the lungs, the capillary beds, kidneys, and the glomerulus, the linings of the heart and the blood vessels, as well as the linings of the lymphatic system. So those are the things that I need you to be able to know. Can you recognize this on site? Look at this slide and say this for sure is simple squamous. Then can you name a location where you would find simple squamous tissues? And then also, what is the function of this? Excellent at diffusion, excellent at filtration. Our next one are also one layer thick, but these are one layer thick. And if you look, they are wide and they are tall. They're not pancake shaped. These are cuboidals. So these are, since they are one layer thick, simple, and since they are wide as they are tall, they are cuboidal. So this is simple cuboidal epithelium tissue. These guys, we can see one layer thick. And this particular slide is in the kidneys. And in the kidneys, we just mentioned about the glomerulus. It's going to have simple squamous. But as you go down the nephron and leave the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule, you're going to get into the convoluted tubules. So in the kidney tubules are where we will find this as a location for simple cuboidal. Also in other types of ducts and in the surface of the ovary are also going to have some of this type of tissue. So that's the locations that we might find simple cuboidal. My favorite is going to be, this slide is the kidneys. So this is my textbook picture right here, but there are also other locations where you could find simple cuboidal. What are they great at? They are cuboidal shaped. They are a little bit thicker, more cytoplasm in there. So they are going to be in charge of secretion and absorption. Secretion and absorption. In the kidney tubules, for example, we are going to be reabsorbing all sorts of stuff back into the bloodstream from the filtrate. And then we will also be secreting things into that filtrate that we no longer need and that will go out as urine. So secretion and absorption are a great function of simple cuboidal epithelium tissues. So identify this guy on site. Where's a location where you might find this tissue, and what is the function of this tissue type of epithelium? Next one down the list is simple columnars. Our simple columnars are, again, they are one layer thick because they're called simple, and they are going to be very tall versus their width. Look how tall and skinny this guy is. Absolutely column shaped, one layer thick, simple columnars. On our simple columnars, these guys are going to be in locations like this is in particular the intestines. This is the GI tract. So we will find them lining the GI tract. We'll also find these guys on the gallbladder and other type of ducts. And we might find these guys in the bronchi as they go from our pseudostratified and go down into simple columnar. And then eventually they will make their way down the alveolar sacs and be that simple squamous again. We might find simple columnar in the uterine tubes, fallopian tubes, as well as the uterus. So be able to recognize this guy on site, that this is simple columnar, one layer thick, very tall cells, simple columnar tissue. What is their location? This particular slide is of the intestines, so GI tract. And then what is a function? Secretion and absorption of these cells secreting things. If we're talking about the intestine, these guys could be brush border cells that secrete all sorts of enzymes that help you break down and digest your food. Another thing of importance on our simple columnar epi in the GI tract a lot of times we are going to have tissues called mucous membranes, and on the mucous membranes, those are going to have cells that produce the mucus. So your respiratory tract, your reproductive tract, GI tract, all have mucous membranes, and the cell that is important in the mucous membrane is this guy. So this guy looks like a goblet, right? So he's called a goblet cell. And so if you can see, it does kind of look this guy right there, this guy right here. This is also a goblet cell. This is a goblet cell. So these guys are going to produce the mucus. They will produce mucus. If we were able to zoom in on these simple columnar cells and looked in particular at their apical surface, especially on the GI tract, they may have microvilli. And so microvilli are these little like comb-like projections from the cell membrane of that individual cell, and that allows for greater surface area. And we said secretion and absorption was a big thing in the intestine. So they are going to absorb all that food going along your GI tract. So these guys have not only microvilli, but they also have goblet cells like this guy right here. Next on the list, remember how we talked about how some of these guys were one layer thick and that was simple. And then another layer, if they had multiple layers all on top of each other, they were called stratified. But then there was a group of tissue that looked like it was stratified, but it's not. It's not. This is only one layer thick. So this stuff, here's its basilar surface right here. And then here's the apical surface is here, all along here. And these are called pseudo-stratified because they look like they're stratified, but they are not. These are a single layer of cells. But since they overlap each other a little bit and they look like they're stratified, they are called pseudo-stratified. So be able to recognize this guy on sight. It's one of my favorite tissues in lab. It's super cool. I like to talk about it because where do we find this guy? We find this guy in the respiratory tract. We said the respiratory tract is filled with mucous membranes, just like the GI tract is. So we may have goblet cells in here. I can't make one out in particular right this second, but I know they're in there. And so we're going to have goblet cells produce mucus, and the mucus is going to catch all the particles that we are inhaling in the air that make their way down into our trachea. And so this is our trachea lining right here. This is all of this stuff is pseudostratified columnar cells. So we got mucous membranes, goblet cells producing mucus. The mucus gets sticky and it captures these dust particles and things that we're inhaling in our lungs, captures them in the mucus. And then this stuff, all of this stuff right here, I hope you can make it out. This stuff that looks like pink hair is cilia. So we've got, oh, there's a goblet cell. Okay. We got a goblet cell right there. He's producing the mucus. And then all this mucus captures these particles, right? In our trachea, in our respiratory tract. And then the cilia, this pink hairy stuff at the top, the cilia is going to move in these rhythmic like movements, and it kind of acts like an elevator. And so it's going to move the mucus up through your respiratory passages and allow you to cough that stuff out. So if anybody's ever had a cold or anything like that, you know what I'm talking about, where, you know, mucus breaks free and you're able to cough that stuff out. You can thank all of this cute pink hairy cilia that lines your trachea and your respiratory passages that helps move it like a little elevator, move that stuff up and out of your respiratory passages, and you can cough it up and get rid of it. So this is a type of epithelium called pseudo, because it looks like it's multiple layers, but it's not. It's just one. Pseudo stratified. And since they are very, very tall, they are columnar shaped cells. And this in particular is a ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelia that is found in the respiratory tract, so specifically in the trachea. If we zoomed out on this slide, we might be able to see the tracheal rings of cartilage down here, but it's hard to see. It's hard to make out. But down there is going to be your tracheal rings. Up here is your airflow in the lumen, and this is the epi that lines the trachea. All of that is pseudostratified, ciliated columnar epithelial. We've got goblet cells in there, like this guy. There's a goblet cell. I'm sure there's another one, maybe this guy sneaking in there. But we've got goblet cells, and they do have cilia on our pseudostratified columnars. So their function is secretion, secrete the mucus, and propulsion of the cilia to move the stuff up and out of your respiratory passages. So now we are moving into true stratified. So we said multiple layers. Anything that is stratified is multiple layers. And these, if you look, we got some really thin cells up here, all of these really thin cells. And you can see there are layers upon layers upon layers in this. So this slide is of the tongue, and this is going to be stratified, multiple layers, and these are thin cells, so they are the squamous type of epi. Stratified squamous. We find this on the tongue, we find this on the skin. The stuff on the tongue is called non-keratinized stratified squamous because keratin is a protein that we find in our hair, that we find in our nails, and that keratin is going to act as sort of like a waterproofing agent. And we don't want our tongue to be waterproof. We want to be able to taste our food and have that sense. So these are non-keratinized type. We will find them in the mouth. We also find stratified squamous in the vagina as well. So those are two locations where you might find stratified squamous that are non-keratinized, non-waterproof kind. What is their job? It's the tongue, and we are going to ingest, possibly abrasive food or really hot food. Maybe you had a really hot tea or hot coffee or something like that, or some hot food, and we want multiple layers. If we just have one simple squamous layer on our tongue, that would not provide a whole lot of protection. So we need the stratified layers because they are going to give us all sorts of protection. So this is stratified squamous epithelium. We find this guy on the tongue. Its job is to protect, and it is specifically the non-keratinized epithelium there. So this one's on the tongue. Here's another stratified squamous. Look at all these cells, really thin little pancakes. Squamous cells, lots of layers. You can even see how the layers are starting to slough off. This is the stratum corneum of the skin, and it is going to get replaced. We replace our skin, every month. That epidermis is going to slough off, and so you will replace your skin, and this is the stratified squamous on the skin. They are, again, for protection, because we definitely want protection on the surfaces of our skin. If it was simple squamous, that would not be good. No protection at all. We need stratified squamous. This is going to be the keratinized type of stratified squamous because it's going to have keratin in there. That's that protein that's going to allow us to be, water resistant, not necessarily waterproof, but water resistant with the keratin that is found in the stratified squamous epithelium of our skin. So this location, identified on site that this is a slide of skin, and its function is going to be stratified squamous to protect us from everything that's outside and keep what's outside outside and keep everything inside for stratified squamous. The next type of epithelium is one that we didn't really talk about on our simple or our stratified or our pseudo-stratified. This is kind of a cool category, and it's called transitional. So transitional job, it is stretchy. It is stretchy. So epi, we said all types of epi, whether it's stratified, squamous, stratified, simple, or pseudo-stratified, that it is going to be that protective outside layer. Transitional is the same thing. It is still another type of epithelium, but this type of epithelium can survive in areas that stretch. So think your bladder, right? That thing can stretch and hold all the fluid. So when you really have to go, it's really stretched out and it's still okay. This is transitional epithelium. So we're going to find out in all things that might stretch. Your bladder, your ureters coming down from the kidney to the bladder, and leaving the bladder would be your urethra. On the way out, definitely on the proximal end of the urethra, we're going to find transitional epithelium. So be able to identify this stuff. Here's our basilar surface. Here's our apical surface. And these guys, all of this is transitional. All these cells, all of this is transitional epithelium. So know our location. Know its function is that it's super stretchy and allows for distension of that, if it's the bladder, of that area. So this is transitional epithelium. So those are all the slides that we have regarding epithelial tissues. Are there more types of epithelium out there? Yes, we don't have slides for stratified cuboidal, for example. So we in particular won't have that on our lab practical, but it is out there. You might find stratified cuboidal in sweat glands, the eccrine glands, or your salivary glands. All three of those salivary glands might have stratified cuboidal. We just don't have a slide to put in our PowerPoint for it, but it's still there. It's another type that you need to know for lecture. There's also stratified columnar. We don't need to know it for lab because we don't have the slides to show you here in this PowerPoint. But for lecture, you might need to know about stratified columnar. And where will we find these guys? The ducts of some of the glands and also in the urethra. And then we can see, the function, secretion, and if we were talking about stratified cuboidal, it would be protection for those surfaces. So these are two types that are not in our lab, but you might need to know those guys for lecture. But we did cover our other guys. We covered simple squamous, 1 layer thick pancake. We covered simple cuboidal, 1 layer thick, cuboidal shaped, about as wide as they are tall. Simple cuboidal. We covered simple columnar, 1 layer thick, and it is very, very tall compared to how wide it is with the simple cuboidals. We covered the pseudostratified that looked like they were stratified, but they weren't. We covered stratified squamous that we could find in the skin or the tongue, and we covered the transitional epi that we find in the bladder. So on our lab, I need you to be able to identify these slides on site. I need you to identify also where you might find it. So where's the location for this particular type of tissue, as well as the function of this tissue. Is its job protection? Is its job filtration? Is its job secretion? What is its function? So know all three of those things for the different types of epithelial tissue.